Generation Z is often described as too sensitive, too anxious, addicted to their phones. But what if what looks like fragility is actually adaptation to a world that never stopped changing? What if this generation isn't weak, but simply the first to grow up exposed to everything all the time? If you were born between 1997 and 2012, or if you live with someone from this generation, this might change the way you see them. Generation Z has never known a world without the internet. From early childhood, there were social media platforms, real-time news, constant comparisons, endless opinions. They grew up watching global crises unfold live, economic instability, cultural shifts, social transformation happening at high speed. While previous generations discovered the world gradually, Generation Z was immersed in it without filters, and that shapes the brain. It shapes perception. It shapes emotional patterns. Psychology shows that the environment we grow up in strongly influences how we think, react, and relate to others. And for Generation Z, the environment was constant intensity. Unlike previous generations, Gen Z grew up hearing about mental health openly, anxiety, depression, self-awareness, therapy. They developed emotional vocabulary earlier in life. Many can clearly express what they are feeling, but this is often misunderstood. When someone says, "I feel emotionally overwhelmed," it doesn't automatically mean weakness. It may mean awareness. Maybe this generation isn't overly sensitive. Maybe they simply learned to name emotions that others were taught to hide. Generation Z also reports higher levels of anxiety. But think about the context. They grew up exposed to constant notifications, endless social comparison, pressure to succeed, uncertainty about career stability. The human nervous system was never designed to process unlimited stimulation. When you live in a constant state of alertness, your brain adapts. What looks like excessive worry may actually be anticipatory protection, a brain trying to stay prepared in an unpredictable world. Another strong trait is their tendency to question authority, traditions, institutions, rules that don't make sense. This is often labeled as rebellion, but there's another interpretation. They grew up with instant access to information. If something feels inconsistent, they research it. If something feels unfair, they challenge it. Questioning does not automatically equal disrespect. It can reflect critical thinking. They are less likely to accept because that's how it's always been as a final answer. If you enjoy this kind of content, exploring human behavior and generational psychology without judgment, consider subscribing to the channel. Here we break down subtle psychological patterns that most people overlook, but that shape who we are, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos about other generations. Generation Z also tends to have a more fluid sense of identity. They experiment more. Styles, interests, beliefs. Social media made it possible to explore different versions of themselves. In the past, identity was more fixed and linear. Now it can evolve publicly. Yes, that can create confusion, but it also builds adaptability. In a rapidly changing world, flexibility is a strength. Maybe fluid identity isn't lack of direction. Maybe it's the ability to evolve. Another defining trait is their strong search for a purpose. For many in Generation Z, financial stability alone is not enough. They want meaning. They want alignment between personal values and work. They witnessed burnout become normalized. They saw people feeling trapped in careers they didn't love. So they started asking deeper questions. Does this actually make sense for me? Is this aligned with who I am? That search for purpose is sometimes labeled unrealistic, but it may simply reflect a desire to live consciously. There is also something historically unique about Generation Z. They are the first generation to grow up under constant digital observation, photos posted before they could consent, opinions shared publicly, moments recorded permanently. Previous generations made mistakes in private. Gen Z makes mistakes online. That changes development. When you grow up knowing anything can be screenshotted, criticized, or judged, you become hyper-aware. This can increase anxiety, but it also increases social intelligence. Many members of Gen Z are highly skilled at reading social cues. They adapt quickly. They understand digital environments intuitively. Social survival became digital survival. And then there's comparison. Generation Z didn't just compare themselves to classmates. They compared themselves to the entire world. Perfect bodies, perfect lifestyles, perfect success stories, visible at all times. The human brain naturally compares, but it was never designed to compare globally, constantly. This can create feelings of inadequacy, but it can also sharpen awareness. Many in Generation Z recognize unrealistic standards quickly. They question beauty norms. They challenge toxic productivity culture. They call out manipulation. Growing up surrounded by illusion can sharpen perception. They were also exposed to heavy topics early in life: politics, climate change, economic instability, social justice movements. Issues that previous generations encountered later were part of their teenage years. That level of awareness can feel overwhelming, but it can also accelerate maturity. Many Gen Z individuals think deeply about global systems and long-term consequences, sometimes exhausted, but informed. One more thing that often gets misunderstood about Generation Z is their relationship with comfort. Many people assume they are avoiding discomfort, but the reality is more complex. They grew up watching how quickly life can change. Jobs disappear, plans collapse, systems fail. So emotional safety became a priority. They are more likely to leave environments that feel toxic, more likely to question relationships that drain them, more likely to step away from situations that previous generations were taught to endure silently. Sometimes this looks like fragility, but it can also be self-protection. In psychology, awareness is a first step toward change. And in many ways, Generation Z notices patterns faster, in people, in institutions, and in themselves. So when people say, "This generation is too sensitive," or "they wouldn't survive in the past," maybe a better question is, would previous generations have handled this level of exposure any differently? Every era creates its own psychological challenges, and Generation Z grew up in the most mentally stimulating period in human history. Maybe they're not fragile. Maybe they're adapting. Maybe they're the first generation that refused to ignore emotional discomfort. The generation that talks openly about mental health. That questions outdated systems. That seeks authenticity instead of appearances. Yes, there are struggles. Digital overload, comparison pressure, emotional fatigue. But there are also strengths. Empathy, adaptability, critical thinking, a strong desire for meaning. If you're part of Generation Z, which of these traits resonates with you the most? And if you're from another generation, what differences stand out to you? Share your perspective in the comments. I genuinely want to read your thoughts. If you enjoy understanding human behavior in a reflective and balanced way, subscribe to the channel. Every week we explore psychological traits that help you understand yourself and the people around you. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next generational analysis, because every generation carries invisible marks worth understanding. See you in the next video.